Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Reaper's Song by Lauraine Snelling, narrated by Callie Beaulieu. 1. Springfield, Missouri. Early summer, 1885. He's dead. But I didn't come to kill him. I just wanted to know. Zeb McAllister stared at Abe Galloway, the man lying on the ground, blood pooling in the dirt by his side. Now it would only continue. The fight between the McAllisters and the Galloways was turning into a repeat of the Hatfields and McCoys back east. To this day, Zeb didn't know what had started it. Now he might never know. You tried to stop this thing, but 'twon't work now. You better get. The wizened man scrubbed a lined hand across the crevices of a face weathered by storms of both soul and climate. I knowed no good would come of this. Jed used a dirty finger to close the dead man's eyes. They say dead men look peaceful, but you gotta have peace in your soul first. Zebulon shook his head. Peace was what he'd been seeking. He hadn't meant for this to happen. Would the sheriff believe self-defense? Not much chance. Too many men had heard Zeb's father, Zachariah McAllister, order his only son to swear on the family Bible that he would seek vengeance for Zachariah's spilled-out blood. It didn't matter how many years ago that promise had been made, nor how many times Zeb had tried to restore the friendship between the neighboring families. Old Abe Galloway was as dead as he could ever be, and Zebulon McAllister had pulled the trigger. Zeb stared down at the rifle clenched in his hand. The desire to fling it into the oak scrub brought his arms up, poised to release the stock and send the gun spinning into eternity. Guns had been used for killing folks far too long already, and there was no end in sight. But years of having his Pa's creed hammered into his head enabled him to keep the grip firm, and he brought the Winchester back to his side. He could hear the words as if Pa stood right beside him. Treat your rifle better'n you do any woman, for only your rifle will remain faithful to you. Today bore out that truth. His rifle had saved his life. You're bleedin', son. Zeb looked at the trail of red oozing down his arm. Only a flesh wound. 'Twere mighty close. Granny says an inch is as good as a mile. That she do. What do you want to do with the body? Jedediah McAllister, Zeb's nearest uncle, nudged the dead man's leg with the toe of his boot. You think there's any chance they'll think he's run off if we bury him? Old Jed shook his head. They knowed he was coming to meet you. Then leave him here. Zeb spun on his heel. Maybe Ma's got breakfast ready. Come on. You sure you don't want to dump him in the cave? Zeb paused. That might slow him down a mite. He turned and grasped the dead man by the ankles. You take the head and I'll lead. We'll clean up the trail on the way back. Grunting, the old man did as Zeb told him. In spite of the snow-white hair, now hidden by his slouch hat, Jed rarely gave his opinion unless asked, and had never volunteered for the job of family head, in spite of being the eldest remaining male of the direct McAllister lineage. I couldn't stand looking at his face, Zeb thought as they lugged their burden through the thickets and down into a shallow valley. Behind a moss-covered boulder, the mouth of a limestone cave welcomed them with a damp, cool breeze. Some said the Ozark Mountains were so riddled with caves that an earthquake would collapse the southern half of Missouri and most of Kentucky. Zeb didn't much care about the rest of the country. Right now, he was only concerned about his own hide. Why did Abe go for his gun? He knew we was only comin' to the clearin'. The thoughts crowded his head while he stumbled further into the cave looking for the pool of water that collected there every year. If they weighted the body, the discovering of it might take even longer. He knew the cave well. He and his sisters had played there often on hot, muggy August days as the cave was always cool. A shiver ran up his back. Never had he tried to hide a dead body there, though. The temperature changed, as he knew it would, telling him the pool lay right ahead. He stopped and listened. Only the drip of water off the shelf to the back of the pool broke the stillness. Fill his boots with sand, and I'll add some rocks to his breeches and pockets. Zeb went about his business even as he spoke. Within minutes they rolled the body forward and heard the water welcome its treasure with a gentle splash. Wish I could say rest in peace, Abe. But there ain't no peace where you are, I'm sure. Together, they turned and left the coolness of the cave, brushing their footprints away with a branch. Back in the clearing, they made sure the bloody forest duff and leaves were hidden, knowing full well that if the Galloways brought their hounds, the dogs would find the trail no matter how well they tried to hide it. When they got back to the horses, They swung into the saddle and headed for home, no longer trying to hide their trail. Speed made more sense now. The McAllister hounds set up their own ruckus before the men even reached the home farm. Zeb could hear Old Blue lead in the chorus, singing a song of welcome, since the dogs already recognized who was coming. The tone would indeed be different for an approaching stranger. Something caught in Zeb's throat, and he coughed several times, trying to clear it. He sniffed and hawked, but the lump in his throat wouldn't be spit out. He would have to leave home. Mary Martha, 4 years older than he and more mother than his ma had ever been in his younger years, jumped down from the weathered porch. Her curls billowing behind her, she darted across the grass and ran down the lane to meet them. When he was young, his ma held the farm together while waiting for his father to come back from the war. After Zachariah returned, minus an arm and a foot, and withdrew into bitter silence, she still kept the farm running. Today, she was cooking his birthday breakfast, and unbeknownst to her, his last meal at home. "I heard shots." Mary Martha plowed to a stop before them, her skirts swirling around her legs, a furrow separating her green eyes. "There's blood on your arm." "Just a flesh wound." Zeb slid his foot from the stirrup and leaned forward to give her a hand up. With a grace born of long practice, Mary Martha swung up behind him and settled her skirts over her knees. Immediately she began to inspect the wound. "What about Abe?" He weren't interested in talking. The clip-clop of the horse's hooves sounded loud in the silence. He shook his head when she started to say something. "Don't ask. What you don't know can't hurt you." Jed held up 2 rabbits in his left hand. "Shame it took 2 shots to bag these. If anybody should happen to ask, I got the hides to prove it." Mary Martha laid her forehead against her brother's back. "You're leaving, then?" Her tone said she wasn't really asking a question. Zeb nodded. "Soon's I can get some things together." "Ma has breakfast ready." "Good thing." He stopped the horse at the side of the barn. "I'll be up in a minute." "You go on," Jed said. "I'll get your horse ready. You want to take 2?" Zeb swung to the ground, his left arm burning as though someone had laid a fiery branding iron against it. "No sense in it. You need the horses here for field work. Buster and me will make out just fine." Zeb walked toward the house, studying it as if he could commit to memory every leaf shadow, every grade board and shingle to draw on in the days ahead. He inhaled, adding to his mental storehouse the smell of bacon frying and cornbread fresh from the oven, oak trees and bridal wreath, wood smoke and new hay in the field. The dogs whined, their tails rattling the fence. A rooster crowed, and a half-tailed cat chirped and wound itself around his ankles. Mary Martha met him in the door with a basin of warm water, lye soap, and rags. "Sit." She pointed at the rocker. Zeb sat. He studied the sagging porch step and the splintered section in the porch rail. He'd been meaning to fix them, but field work came first, and there were never enough hours in his day to even begin all he wanted to do, let alone finish. And now with the eldest, Eva Jane, married and in a home of her own, the burden fell back on Mary Martha and their mother. How would they manage without him? His ma wasn't as young as she used to be and older than she should be. The war had been harder on the women than the men. Carrying on was tougher than dying. How he knew all these things, Zeb couldn't say. He just knew it was so. "There. You keep that clean, and healing should be no problem." Mary Martha got to her feet and, swishing the now pink water around in the basin, dumped it into the bridal wreath bush that sprawled to the right of the steps. As children, they'd made crowns of the white blossoms. The memory stabbed him like a thorn from the red roses that arched over the entry. Once they tried weaving the 2 together. Only once. "You go sit now." "And you?" "I'll be getting your things together." "It all has to fit into the bedroll and saddlebags. Buster can't carry much extra weight, not if we're going to make some time." "I know." She refused to look in his face, but spun on her toes and headed for the dusky interior of the house. Zeb paused in the doorway. The kitchen and living room shared the front of the house, since the family could no longer afford to hire help to cook out in the summer kitchen. An oval braided rug kept bare feet off the cold floorboards in the winter. The dog trot between the house and the summer kitchen had become the storage shed for keeping wood dry in the winter. "Set," his mother, hair dappled gray like the horse he rode and twisted into a knot at the base of her skull, pointed to the chair. She used words like pepper, only enough to season. Likewise her smile. But when it shone forth like now, the whole world felt the blessing. As Zeb did, that lump returned to his throat. She asked no questions, but set the full plate before him and laid a hand on his shoulder. Zeb bowed his head. Lord God bless. Even his thoughts could go no further, let alone his words. Bless this food to my son's body, and keep him in your grace. Amen, he choked on the simple word. So many things he wanted to say, so many he needed to hear, like why the Galloways hated the McAllisters to the point of murder. He cleaned his plate, using the last of the cornbread to sop up the egg yolks. Mary Martha picked up his bedroll, wrapped in a piece of canvas, and set it down on the chair beside him. His mother handed him a Bible, the leather cover worn from hands searching for truth and comfort. But, Ma, this is your own. She stopped him with a look. Thank you, Ma. It'll never leave my side. Nor will the good Lord. She handed him his hat off the rack by the door. Go with God. Her hand found his and clenched it once, then again. The last he saw of her, she and Mary Martha were standing on the top step between the porch posts, the red rambler rose vine arching over them, as if promising to keep them safe. He lifted his hand in farewell and kicked his horse into a lope. They had miles to cover, and only God himself knew what lay ahead. 2. Dakota Territory. Spring, 1886. All I want to do is go home, Zeb McAllister muttered as he sat on his horse and stared at the raging Missouri River. Buster snorted and pawed at the muddy bank. You don't really want to swim this flooding beast, do you, fella? His mount shook his head, setting the bit to jangling. A tree floated by, pointing its black and gnarled roots toward the lowering sky. Didn't think so. Zeb looked back over his shoulder. Nothing to see but prairie grass sprouting fast enough to watch it grow. The last man he'd talked with spoke a guttural combination of languages, most of which he'd found unintelligible. He'd gotten the drift, though, and shaken his head. No, he didn't have any fire water to sell or trade, and he didn't want the skins the Indians showed him either. Home. He closed his eyes and could see his sister Mary Martha running across the field to meet him. His mother would be standing on the porch waving her apron. The smell of something good cooking would waft out on the breeze and add its welcome home. Old Blue would be barking fit to kill, and Uncle Jed would hustle out of the barn to see what was causing all the commotion. For nearly a year now he'd been on the run, working for a while here and there until some inner sense warned him it was time to move on. Had the Galloways called in the law? Or, as he most suspected, were the two younger sons trailing him? Nightmares haunted him, where he saw himself turning around just in time to see a gun flash. He looked skyward. Your book speaks of vindication, God. I think you done hid your face this time. Even the lowering clouds seemed to indicate God's displeasure. What was the sense of it all? He thought of riding right into that flooding river and letting it carry him on to the next life. Buster shook his head. Zeb patted his shoulder. No sense wasting a good horse that way. I got a bargain for you, God. You leave me alone, and I won't pester you neither. The wind whipped up the brown river, sending wavelets to wash his horse's hooves. He let the reins loose so the animal could drink. A bloated cow drifted by, turning with the current. Somewhere up this God-forsaken river, some farmer had lost part of his stock in the flood. At least he knew there were other people in the area. Cows like that didn't run loose on the prairie. So, you suppose that farm is on this side of the river, or t'other? His horse raised its head and, ears pricked, looked toward the west. Thunderheads mounted on the horizon like mountains blotting out the sky. Zeb followed the direction his horse pointed. Was that someone coming toward him? He studied the growing shape, knowing that, even this far from Missouri, he didn't dare trust that the Galloways hadn't found him. Strange. All the way he'd traveled, and still he was bound by the word Missouri. More like misery out here. Not many trees to hide in. Most of them were trunk deep in floodwater. He waited. The rider drew closer, skirts billowing about her legs as she sat astride her horse. Zeb let out the breath he hadn't realized he held. Hey, mister, you seen an old red cow around here? she called as she drew close enough to be heard. "I saw one floating by about midway out there," he pointed to the river. "Oh, horse feathers!" She slapped her thigh in frustration. The horse swerved and she pulled him to a jolting stop, just far enough away so she could see Zeb's face and he hers. She crossed her hands over the reins on her horse's withers and studied the stranger. "You sure it was a red one?" "Yep, but I'm not sure it was your red one. Couldn't tell its age." The girl looked to be about 12. A faded brown fedora, well ventilated in the crown, was pulled low on her forehead and shaded her eyes. Straw-colored hair poked out of 2 of the holes, strands pulled loose from the braid he'd seen bounce when she stopped. A man's black coat flopped wide open, showing a skirt and top that hadn't seen wash water any more recently than her face. "You said floating. You sure it weren't swimming?" "Not on its side like that." He hated to give her more bad news. It looked like she'd had too much of that already in her short life. "Ugh." She slumped, and after a deep sigh, looked up again. "Look like any chance if I snagged it we could butcher it out?" Zeb thought a moment, then shook his head. "Not bloated like that." She appeared to be studying the mane in front of her hands, but when her shoulders began to twitch, Zeb knew she was crying. Now what to do? He couldn't go off and leave her like this, and yet... He let out a sigh much like the one she'd given. No way did he want to get mixed up with... With what? A family in trouble? As if he wasn't in enough trouble of his own. But his mother had taught him well. "Do unto others as thou would have them do unto thee." She'd burned the golden rule into his mind and heart from the time he could lisp his first verse. "Look, miss, I ain't miss, and I don't need no one's pity. So the old cow was stupid enough to go drink in a flooding river. I was tired of milking her anyway for the little she gave. Thank'ee." She jerked her horse into a spin and drummed her heels on his sides. One hand clapping the hat in place and the other working the reins, she headed back the way she came. "Well, that settles that." Zeb glanced up as a gust of wind tried jerking his jacket off his back. The thunderheads seemed to be racing each other eastward, with him directly in their path. He turned his horse and loped downriver in the hopes that he'd find a friendly settler before the storm found him. He hadn't gone 20 paces when he stopped and looked heavenward. "Didn't you hear my bargain?" He chewed the edge of his mustache. "You know this ain't my idea, don't you?" He shook his head and reined his horse around again. What if I can't find her farm? But the feeling didn't let up. It was as if God had lassoed him and was dragging him west after the youngster who hadn't even a nodding acquaintance with soap and water, and who'd been much too proud to let him see her cry. The quaking shoulders had done it in spite of her. Drops the size of teacups were soaking him by the time he heard a dog bark, which was the only thing that kept him from riding on by the soddy that lay half buried in the side of a small hill. Since it faced south, the hillock had about hid it from sight, until he followed the sound of the barking dog and nearly rode right over the roof. He swung off on a curve and rode into what might have been called a yard at one time. A corral, or what was left of it, stuck out on both sides of the sod wall that housed a door with one window beside it. Zeb had seen other dugouts like this in the sand hills of Nebraska. People used whatever they could to create a shelter from the harsh climate. Right now, he and his horse could use some shelter all right, but there was no barn in sight, and the door to the soddy never opened in welcome. Was this the right place? "Hello, the house!" He waited. A horse whinnied and Buster answered. Was the horse inside the dugout? Zeb debated for about a second more, then swung off his mount, his slicker dumping a river of icy rainwater down his neck. He grumbled to himself as he let Buster through the missing fence section and up to the door. He hated to tie his horse out in a downpour like this, but what other choice did he have? He pounded on the door with a gloved fist. "Anyone home?" The dog slunk out from wherever he disappeared to when Zeb rode up. "Some watchdog you are." The dog whined, his ears and tail perking only a mite at the sound of the man's voice. Zeb knocked again. Nothing. The law of the prairie said a man was welcome to an empty home if he needed shelter. Lightning slashed and thunder crashed. He reached for the latch string only to realize there wasn't one, or it had been pulled in. The door creaked open just enough to show part of a face and a hand clutching a rifle, What you want?" Along with the lack of soap and water went a lack of manners. Where he came from, the two were gospel. "If I could get out of the rain." "Don't allow strangers in here, Pa said." "Well, tell your pa I ain't no stranger. I helped you find your cow." He knew that was stretching the truth, but he'd at least saved her further looking. "Can't." "Look, my name is Zebulon McAllister. I just want a place out of the rain, and since your house is the only one around, I had hoped to shelter here. Land sakes, young lady." She waved the gun at him as though she might actually use it. "Is your pa here?" he quickly asked. "No. Gone to get supplies. That's why I can't open the door to strangers." "How about sick folk?" He sneezed once, and then again. The door cracked open a bit more. The dog slunk in, leaving Zeb wishing he could do the same. He knew he could push the door open. The thought had already crossed his mind more than once. "Well then, miss." He waited, hoping she would give a name. "Thank you for nothing. Tell your pa you did indeed abide by his wishes." He turned and, flipping his reins around his horse's neck, reached for the saddle horn. The seat ran water. He should have just stayed in it and headed east like he wanted. Must not have been hearing right, thinking the Lord wanted him to come here. One more strike against the Almighty. "You can come on in. No room for your horse, though." "Pardon me?" He turned back to the doorway. "I said come in, but you'll have to tie your horse to the fence. Only got room for one in here." "May I bring in my saddle?" "If you want." He did want. Jerking a rope out of the saddlebags, he tied it around his horse's neck and then to the one fence post that looked as if it might last out the storm. He slid the bridle off and looped it over his shoulder. But his gloves were so wet he could barely unthread the cinch. After several attempts, he pulled one glove off with his teeth and jerked the latigo loose. Swinging the saddle over his shoulder, he headed for the house. Once inside the door, he breathed in the smell of damp dirt, horse manure, and flickering smoke from the stub of a candle melting on the tabletop. The light reached not much farther than the table on which the candle sat. Zeb let his eyes grow accustomed to the dimness and set his saddle on the dirt floor by the door. A horse snorted back in the darkness. "Manda?" A voice so frail he wasn't sure if it came from a child or an adult broke the silence. "Hush now." Her voice curt. The girl faced Zeb from across the table, her gun at the ready. "Look." Zeb spread his hands in front of him. "Don't you go moving any." She raised the barrel of the rifle. "You're out of the rain, and that's what you wanted." Thank God for small favors. He hoped to lighten the mood, but the frown she wore informed him it hadn't worked. "Look, Miss Manda." "Don't call me that." "Why not? Where I come from, Miss Manda is the polite form of address. My mother taught me that, along with verses from the good book and even some poetry. Now, you wouldn't want to cause my mother any distress in thinking that her son might be disrespectful, would you?" He watched the inner argument chase its way across her face. The gun barrel wobbled. Swift as the water moccasin he'd caught in the swamps back home, he grabbed the rifle, making sure it pointed upward, and jerked it out of her hands. Setting the stock on the dirt floor, he kept the rifle beside his leg. "What you go doing that for?" She came at him, tipping the flimsy table in her search for the rifle. The candle died at the same time as she hit him in the solar plexus with the top of her head. The force of it drove him back a couple of paces. He tripped over his saddle, and the two of them crashed to the floor. It was all he could do to keep hold of the rifle with one hand and try to fend her off with the other. She sat on his chest, pounding her fists into whatever part of his flesh she could connect with. "Ow! Stop that! I wasn't going to hurt you or take anything, and you darn well know it. Stop that now!" His cheek stung, his nose ran wet, and still he couldn't get a good hold of her. "You give me that rifle, and I'll let you up." "Let me up?" He gave a mighty heave and, tipping her to the side, wrapped one leg around her torso and pinned her to the ground. Never in his entire life had he treated a female like this. His ears burned at the thought of what his mother would say. Or did they burn because the girl lambasted him on the way over? He finally managed to clamp hold of one of her wrists and twisted it until she yelped. Now his ears burned from the stream of invectives she hurled at him. "If you'd quit trying to break my head, I'd let you up. Give me my rifle, you—" He tried to ignore the remainder of her sentence. "I will not give you the rifle until you calm down. You might accidentally set the thing off, and—" I don't never accidentally fire that rifle." The sneer in the word, in spite of her bound condition, nearly made him laugh. Spitfire didn't begin to describe the courage of the girl he held. When she elbowed him below the belt, he left off laughing and roared instead. "Now you done it." Ignoring the pain, he shoved the rifle off toward the wall and used both hands to clamp her arms tight against her sides. He used her as a brace to get his feet under him and surged to his feet, pulling her up with him. She drummed her heels against his shins, her breath now coming in gulps. A sobbing whimper from the back of the dugout froze them both. "Who's there?" "I said hush." They both spoke at the same time. He set her on the floor, keeping a strong arm about her waist and her arms locked against her sides. "Now, if you can promise to behave yourself, I am going to—" She stomped on his foot, her heel catching him right across the toes. Zeb gritted his teeth. He hoisted her under one arm, opened the door, and shoved her outside. "You can come back in when you've cooled off enough to talk some sense." He leaned against the door, taking a deep breath. She hammered the door with her fists, calling him every name he'd ever heard, and then some. "Mother, please forgive me. I couldn't think of anything else to do." He wiped one finger under his nose and off on his pant leg. Sure as shootin', she'd given him a nosebleed. The silence from outside made him uneasy. What was she up to now? "Manda?" Surely it was the voice of a child. "Manda will be back in a minute. Soon she can learn to be a bit more welcoming to a stranger." "Manda!" Sobs floated through the stillness, sobs so weak they near to broke his heart. "Who are you, child?" No answer, only sobs and sniffles. The creak of a rope-strung bed told of the child's movements. "Where's your ma?" Hiccups. "Your pa?" Silence. A sniff. Nothing from outside. What to do? Zeb realized he'd rather stir up a nest of rattlers than open the door to see what Manda had in store for him. He felt around for a board to bar the door. Locating it off to the side, he slid the bar in place. He was safe on this side, at least. The storm had passed, letting more light in the small window. He made out the outline of the fallen table and righted it. He could now make out the rope-slung bed in a corner of the small dugout. Then the daylight went out. He turned to see Manda at the window, or at least the outline of her that was visible through the greased paper covering the small square. "Don't worry, Miss Manda. I'm not ruining the place, just putting it to rights. You can come back in if you can behave." He kept his voice conversational, hoping the tone, if nothing else, would soothe both her and the whimpering child. It worked with horses, anyway. Amanda pounded on the door with something more than her fists. "I'm going to let your horse loose." "Be my guest, if it'll make you happy." Zeb knew he could summon Buster with a whistle. He taught him to come that way before the animal was weaned. He stopped at the side of the bed and looked down on a body so slight it didn't even raise the covers. Peeling back the tattered quilt, he flinched at the sour smell that assaulted his nostrils. Oh, dear God. He sank down on his knees and laid a gentle hand on the small head. "You poor baby." While he couldn't see the child's eyes in the dimness, he could feel the body shrink away from his touch. "Now, I'm not going to hurt you, but I know I can help. You think we can get Manda to calm down so I can let her back in the house?" "No." "I didn't think so either. What is your name? I don't want to keep calling you child." "You do have a name, don't you?" "Uh-huh." Zeb waited. The smell nearly gagged him. The horse shifted restlessly, jangling the bit. Manda hadn't even had time to remove that. I'm Deborah." He almost missed the name, it came so softly. "Deborah. That's a lovely name. Right from the Bible." His mind sped through all he could remember of the Deborahs in the scriptures. Deborah was a strong woman, but once she was a little girl like you. How old might you be? No answer. How long since you had anything to eat? The thought of these children starving out here on the plains made him choke worse than the stench. Manda shot a rabbit. We ate that. She talked too well for a baby, but the size of her body, he'd seen skeletons with more flesh on them than she had. Look, I'm going outside to see if I can talk sense with Manda. You stay right here, all right? Yes. His knees cracked as he stood.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?